We are at the Department of Veterans Affairs in Tallahassee, Florida, and we're at the offices of Colonel Mike Prendergast. And we have present for the interview Wendy Vet Edwards, Carlton Cartwright, the Executive Director for the Children's Coalition Incorporated, Joshua Johnson, and Trevor Tepete.
Hi, I'm Wendy Vet Edwards.
Hi, Wendy. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. My first question is, were you drafted or did you enlist to the Air Force?
Actually, I served 31 years on active duty in the United States Army.
Army.
Yes, I had a draft card whenever I was in high school back in the 1970s, but I enlisted on my own in 1978 and spent 3 decades plus in uniform.
So where were you living at the time?
Actually, I was born at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, and I grew up in Tampa and Clearwater, and I graduated from high school in Clearwater and attended junior college there, and I joined the Army over in Clearwater and shipped off and went to Jacksonville and then Fort McClellan, Alabama for my first duty station.
So why did you join, or is it something you always wanted to do, or?
It's kind of a combination of both. It was something I always wanted to do, but I also wanted to do something that was bigger and more important than just me and what my future career might be. Little did I know at the time that my career would actually end up being in the Army and lasting so long. I planned on doing 3 years, getting out, coming back home with my undergraduate degree done, and then figuring out life from there, but it turned out to be a 31-year career calling and loved every minute of it.
So what made you choose the Army as your service branch, serving?
Well, it's a combination of things, actually. My father served in the Army in the Second World War. My father-in-law also served in the Army in the Second World War. My grandfathers served in the Army in the First World War. And so there was a tradition there, but we also had a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins and other relatives in the extended family who served virtually in every branch of our armed forces, to include the Merchant Marines during the Second World War. So I'm not sure if it was, probably my dad, I guess, would be the most significant influence, but also I had a brother-in-law. My wife's brother served in the Army in Vietnam, and my sister's husband also served in the Army in Vietnam and Korea.
Do you recall your first days of service? I see that you served in many different places. And
Actually, I do. I recall waking up in a very sterile, brand new barracks building at the reception station at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and we'd been brought in on buses the night before, had no idea of where we were exactly, and I woke up and we went outside for the first thing in the morning and looked around, and it was like we were in some small mountains with fog and lots of trees and everything. I says, wow, this is not the Alabama I thought I'd be in when I came here for my first duty station.
So what did it feel like?
It was different. It was about 100 guys in an open bay, and a lot of unknowns, and it was culture shock in some respects, but it was also that I was a sponge, just trying to suck up as much knowledge as possible so that I could learn about what it was that I had volunteered to do.
So can you tell me a little bit about your boot camp experience?
Sure. It was hot, very hot, and I think I lost 20 pounds during the first 6 weeks that I was in the Army, and it was a good 20 pounds to lose because it got me back into shape. We walked everywhere. Up and down the mountains, across many parade fields, and we really spent every waking minute, which was probably in the neighborhood of 18 hours a day, studying what it was to be a soldier and how to be very good at what it is that we had volunteered to do. And we learned, all of the field craft that we need to learn, but also the rifle marksmanship and the unarmed self-defense and the first aid and land navigation and those things that would help us survive on whatever endeavors the Army put us into, and we had to survive them.
So where was your first assignment outside of the country?
First assignment out of the country, well, I went on a lot of missions where we would fly away and go somewhere, but my first real overseas assignment was Africa. And I did an outside of the continental United States assignment from 1987 until 1989. We were stationed in Hawaii, and I traveled around the Pacific Rim quite a bit while I was there. And then I volunteered for a program that sent me to graduate school at the University of Florida. and then language training out at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey. And from there, they sent me to Kinshasa, Zaire, and served in the embassy in Kinshasa for a brief period of time because the Civil War started. And went back to the Pentagon briefly for about 90 days or so, and then took another assignment to Cameroon, and I was assigned to the American Embassy in Yaoundé, Cameroon for about 13 months. And quite an experience, vastly different from growing up in the United States and experiencing all the things that we take for granted in the United States.
How did you get through it, through the basic training and were you homesick, or did you have an instructor that kind of motivated you?
No, I was never homesick. We had plenty of instructors motivating us, and you really didn't have time to think too much about it. I was a little bit older than most of the other privates that were in my platoon and in my company. I was 21 years old when I joined the Army. I'd worked in the private sector and really was successful at what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to do something more. But I also wanted to serve our country while I was young enough that, my dad told me that if you serve in your nation's armed forces and contribute to our country, no one can ever take that away from you. And the things that you do will make a difference for future generations of young men and women, and it'll certainly make a huge impact on your kids when you have kids. So I was motivated to be there, and I really wanted to be there. And I also wanted to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and jump out of airplanes after I completed the paratrooper school at Fort Benning, Georgia. So I was very motivated to get through as quickly as possible.
So which wars did you serve in?
Well, I'm an Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran. I'm also an Operation Enduring Freedom veteran. I've got deployments into other areas around the world that weren't necessarily declared wars, like a civil war started when we were in Kinshasa, Zaire, back in 1991. I spent some time in virtually every country in the Middle East during my assignments over the years, and spent quite a bit of time traveling around Asia as well. I was in the United States at Fort Meade, Maryland when 9/11 happened, and while we don't consider that a combat zone, technically it really was, because the United States was attacked by terrorists intent on disrupting our way of life and killing Americans. So pretty busy my last 11 years or so in the Army.
So did you have one job assignment, or did you have different assignments for different deployments?
I had 23 different assignments over the course of my 31 years. My primary career field was military police, both when I was enlisted and once I earned my commission through Officer Candidate School. And I stayed as an MP throughout all of my career, but I did have other specialties that I worked in. I was trained to be a foreign area officer for the Army, and that's why they sent me to the University of Florida to earn a graduate degree, and then to the language school to learn a foreign language before they shipped me overseas with my family to work from the embassy in Kinshasa and in Cameroon and travel around the subcontinent of all of sub-Saharan Africa when I was assigned there.
So did you see combat?
Yes.
Were there many casualties?
Well, we did have some casualties in some of our units that were over there. I've lost several friends that were deployed into both Iraq and Afghanistan, and I earned the Combat Action Badge whenever I was in Iraq back in 2003.
So can you tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences during your deployments in Iraq or Afghanistan?
That's a very lengthy discussion to really get into. I would like to say that the most memorable thing is the great Americans and coalition partners that we had the opportunity to work alongside of. We had great people doing very, very tough work for our nation, and nobody ever questioned it. They were there for all the right reasons, because they knew what was at stake for our country, and that our future for generations of young men and women coming behind us, young women like yourselves and young men like your colleagues that are over here, were very important to us. And that's the reason why we were serving our country and proudly doing what we had to do. And that's the reason why so many of our coalition partners were part of our team going forward to prosecute the war on terrorism, because they knew that it was an existential threat to everything that they stood for as well, and they wanted to be part of the contingent that made sure that we stopped them and prevented them from doing another 9/11 type of attack. My most memorable experience would be very difficult to capture as well after 31 years, because I have got nothing but great memories. A lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities and great people all the way through. But as a soldier and also as a father, one of my most memorable experiences is going to my son's graduation from basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri in 2008, about a year and a half before I retired from active duty, and getting to attend his graduation ceremony and seeing him follow in Dad's footsteps, following his grandfather's footsteps, following his great-grandfather's footsteps into the profession of arms to serve our country. So that's a very proud moment for any father, any parent.
I bet. Were you ever a prisoner of war?
No.
Were you awarded any medals or citations? I see you were awarded many awards,
Yeah,
actually.
Well, after 31 years and all the moves and everything, you know, you're involved in quite a few things. The nation did have multiple things going on over the course of my career. I earned a Bronze Star in Iraq in 2003, I believe, or maybe it was 2004. Earned several Legion of Merit medals, Distinguished Defense Superior Service Medal, Meritorious Service Medals, Army Commendation Medals, and the like. Very proud of the things that my team did, though, more so than my own individual awards. And some of the units that I was with earned Joint Meritorious Unit Awards, Army Superior Unit Awards, and we even got a medal or a unit award from the Coast Guard when I was deployed to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, back in the 1990s. And that was pretty neat because not many people get a Coast Guard unit award whenever they're in the Army.
Did you have any injuries from service?
Yeah, a few. Being a paratrooper, you kind of injure yourself when you. It's not the jump that hurts you; it's the sudden stop when you get to the ground, and you know, knees, ankles, shoulders, back. Your arms get busted up a little bit. Landed in trees a few times, and tore some things up, and had some things surgically repaired, and got back in the game as quickly as I possibly could. Hi.
I'm Trevor.
Trevor, nice to meet you, Trevor.
Nice to meet you. How'd you stay in touch with your family?
Well, back in the old days, it was writing a letter or a postcard and letting them know where I was at whenever I could let them know where I was at. And as the electronic age penetrated more and more into our lives, I was able to keep the family informed of what my whereabouts were when I could via an email. And then later, much later on, we were able to Skype and talk to family with a real-time video conferencing on a good internet connection on those good days when you were at a place where you could get a good internet connection.
What was the food like?
For the most part, my early days, we ate a lot of sea rations and meals ready to eat. Sea rations were things that you might see on TV where they were in tin cans and you'd open them up with a can opener, and it might be the surprise of the day or it might be the best meal of your life whenever you open them up. The most popular thing coming out of a sea ration generally was the fruit cocktail or the pears or the peaches because they were high in energy, they had a lot of sugar in them, and the fruit was still pretty tasty after being in there. The meat was generally always a mystery meat, whether it was a beef, a pork, or a chicken product. It was a mystery meat, and you just kind of throw some Tabasco sauce on it and call it good. And then over the years, we got away from the sea rations and got into the prepackaged meals ready to eat, MREs, and they were not very tasty at the very beginning, but they improved over the years, and now they're as good as anything that you can get just about anywhere when you go into a restaurant. They don't necessarily look that way, but they certainly taste that way. And then there were in a great many of the units that I was in, we did have a deployable dining facility with cooks and folks who could help prepare the meals for the unit. In fact, my very first unit at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, had a great kitchen team there that was part of our organizational structure. And whether we were back at the garrison at Fort Bragg or we were out in the field anywhere in the world that we might end up deploying to, they could whip up a very, very good meal that was awesome, and it would get you through the day and make you more capable of getting your job done. It was amazing what those guys and gals could do to keep us going. As we got more mature in the stuff in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, we actually had contractors that came in and ran large, very, very large operations that fed thousands upon thousands of people every day. It was like a assembly line process in a humongous warehouse where they processed breakfast, lunch, and dinner and a midnight meal as well on a 24/7 a day basis, 365 days out of the year.
Did you feel any stress or pressure while serving?
Well, yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. When you don't know what's out over the horizon, all those unknowns out there put a lot of stress on you. But also, whenever you're a leader and you're responsible for leading men and women, whether it's a training operation or it's actually taking them out into a combat operation or some other type of contingency operation, there's going to be a lot of stress out there because you're responsible for their lives. And you're responsible for bringing them back home at the end of the mission so that they can return back home to their families safe and sound.
And what was something special you did while you served?
I did a lot of special things over the course of my career. We had numerous opportunities to participate in humanitarian operations in my career field, and being able to help folks have a better quality of life and survive a natural or man-made disaster is always a special and unique privilege and opportunity to do something. When I was assigned to the embassy in Yaoundé, Cameroon, one of the most unique things that I got to do was go with a team of about 25 medical folks from a Army Reserve unit up in New York into the very, very deep, far reaches of the northern parts of Cameroon. And we provided medical care to over 5,000 people who hadn't seen a doctor, in many cases, ever in their lives. And being able to help them get access to that medical care and help people be cured of some of the tropical diseases that they got exposed to, or be able to perhaps treat some of the medical conditions that required a surgical procedure to help them out was pretty neat for all of us. And for me, as a guy that's not in a medical career field, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do something like that.
And how do people entertain themselves?
Back in the old days, a lot of card games would be played, and a lot of folks did reading. It's amazing that you could go just about anywhere, and a soldier, sailor, airman, marine, or coast guardsman would always have a cargo pocket with a paperback book of one kind or another in there, and they'd be reading something from Tom Clancy or Harold Coyle or perhaps Jack Higgins or one of the other great authors of the day. And the other thing is that a lot of guys and gals participate in sporting events. When you've got four or 5 minutes sitting around, tossing around a baseball, tossing around a football, playing soccer. Soccer is very easy to do whenever you're in the field condition. All you need is to figure out where your goals are and show where the boundaries are. And you've got folks out there playing soccer in combat boots and their fatigue pants.
Were there entertainers?
In Iraq and Afghanistan, we did have some entertainers show up on occasion. A wide variety of folks were traveling with the United Service Organization, traveling over there. And I think we also had some USO entertainers show up when I was stationed in Korea as well. And we had top name rock musicians come over, country musicians come over. We even had folks from, back then it was called WWF Wrestling, I think they call it WWE Wrestling now, show up and put on shows. It's pretty neat. One time we were in Bagram, Afghanistan, and it was just miserably cold, like 10 degrees outside, and these bodybuilders and WWE wrestlers came in, and they're all really bulked up from working out in the gym and everything, and they've got just their trunks on and their boots, and they're getting into the wrestling ring, and we're all bundled up in parkas, freezing to death, and they're out there putting on a show for us. So it's pretty special.
Where did you travel in the service?
I traveled to more than 120 countries during my 31 years on active duty. I hit as a foreign area officer for the Army. I hit every country in Africa at least once when I was stationed on the continent. And then when I was in Europe, I hit all of those countries at least once. Traveled quite a bit through the Middle East as well. I would be based in one location, but my duties took me all around the region, and pretty much lived out of a suitcase or out of a what we call a rucksack, a backpack, for most of the time when I was traveling. And spent probably a good 14 years of my 31 years traveling and going to exotic places that people would have a hard time finding on a map.
What were some of the pranks you or others pulled?
One of the funniest pranks we ever did, I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, it's funny as heck. There was a guy that I worked for, he's still alive, he's a great friend and mentor, love him to death like an older brother, and he was stressed out. He was stressed out, and we used to do stuff to his office. He was the only one that had a private office when we were deployed to Cuba, and we would go in and mess with stuff on his desk and hide things, and sometimes we would go in and take everything out of his office and hide it. And he'd come in after lunch, and it's like, where's all my stuff? One time we went in there and took all of his, it was right before we were leaving to return back from the deployment. We took every bit of the furniture out of his office. We put a palm tree in there, we put beach sand on the floor, we put suntan lotion in there, and we put a beach chair in there, and we put a bunch of empty beer cans in there. And he never found his desk after that, and he was not happy. And he knew I did it, but he could just never catch me.
Do you have any photographs?
Yeah, a pretty good collection of photographs of things. A lot of times, in the old days, we would take what we call wet film photographs using a 35 millimeter camera, and once we started shifting away to the digital domain for photography, people don't actually have the photographs. All they have is the electronic image that they've got. But I've got a pretty substantial collection of photographs from virtually every assignment that I was in on.
Who were some of the people in the photographs?
Kind of uniquely, lots of senior leaders from military organizations all across the world. I got to meet. I got to meet presidents and prime ministers whenever I was traveling throughout Africa. I got to meet Tony Blair when I was on a trip with Senator Max Cleland in 2000. No, I'm sorry, not 2000. It was 1990. Gosh, 1998. April of 1998, I got to meet Prime Minister Tony Blair, which was one of the neatest experiences I ever had. What a fine gentleman and leader he was. Also did an exchange program with the Parliament of Canada, and got to meet several of the ministers there, and as well the parliamentary leadership from the House of Lords. So just neat experiences.
What did you think of officers and fellow soldiers?
I thought that they were great people, and it was a remarkable bunch of colleagues that made my career phenomenally successful. And what I tell a lot of people, and it's something that you will learn and appreciate on down the road perhaps, that when you're around great people, you really don't realize it until much later. And as a young man growing up in the Army, I got to stand on the shoulders of giants in order to be a better leader, because I learned from them and their experiences that made them successful when they were in our Army.
Did you keep a personal diary?
No, I wasn't really much into writing a personal diary. Probably the closest thing to that would be some of the emails I would send to my wife, or occasionally the long letters. Didn't have a lot of time to write, but when I did, they would be in fits and starts, and they would be pretty insightful into what was going on and what I was thinking about, but just never was one to keep a diary.
Do you recall when your service ended?
Yes, I had a remarkable retirement ceremony at the Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, where I was born. I was born at MacDill Air Force Base, and a 4-star general presided over my retirement ceremony and presented my retirement award to me. And my wife and my children were there. My son was on active duty in the Army, along with my son-in-law, who was on active duty in the Army. And a lot of friends and relatives were there as well.
What did you do for like weeks and days after your retirement?
After I retired, I basically got caught up on all those chores around the house that never got done because I was too busy working. And also got busy trying to sort through making sure that I got my medical benefits put into place, since I'd sustained a few injuries over the course of my career. I wanted to make sure that I could get taken care of and go out and continue to have a productive life after I hung my uniform up for the last time. Went to the beach a little bit too, took some vacation time.
Did you go back to school?
Actually, I'm in school right now. I'm working on my doctorate degree in business administration at St. Leo University. I believe that education is a lifelong journey, and the minute that you quit learning is the minute that you probably quit growing as a human being. So I'm thirsty for knowledge, always have been.
Use the GI Bill, Colonel?
I am. I'm using the post 9/11 GI Bill to help me out with the tuition and paying for the books.
Okay.
Did you make close friends while in the service?
I made a lot of close friends while I was in the service. The unique thing about the uniform is that everybody's a friend. It's the one thing that unifies us and identifies us all, because it all says United States something. It may be Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, or Coast Guard, but everybody's a friend that's wearing that uniform, and we know that, and we appreciate one another for what we do in order to really come together to help our nation out and be there for our nation in times of need.
Do you still continue any of those relationships?
Actually, I do. I've got some very close friends that I talk to at least on a weekly basis. Probably one of my longest, most important friends is a guy I went through basic training with. We still email, text, or talk to each other a couple times a month, and he was there for the baptism of my daughter, and he was there for the marriage of my son. I don't think he made it for the wedding for my daughter, but he and his family have been very close to mine over the years. And quite a few of the other friends I served with in combat are scattered all around the world, but we exchange Christmas cards and occasional emails and run into each other in places like Disney World when you least expect it.
How did the military affect your life? It's obvious that you dedicated, committed, but in your own words, how has the military affected your life and your way of thinking?
I think the biggest thing that's been most important for me is that it gave me the leadership tools that I need to be much more successful than what I would be had I not been exposed to the military lifestyle. And the other thing was, it was very, very important to me, is it helped me instill the self-discipline so that everything that I undertake, if I decide I want to do it, I won't let anything stop me from doing it. And being a high achiever is very, very important for a person serving our armed forces. But it's also very important in life. And never settling for second best is something that we all pride ourselves on, because we want to be the best. That's why I wanted to be a part of the Army and stayed in the Army for more than 3 decades.
Is there anything that you'd like to add to the interview that you can think of that you feel like you may have left out?
There's a lot that I could add. There's a lot that I could add, but no, it was really a true privilege to serve our country. I never imagined as a kid growing up on the streets of West Tampa and Ybor City that I'd have the opportunity to serve this great nation to the levels that I did, and also to grow professionally, to earn multiple undergraduate degrees and graduate degrees while I was on active duty, travel to more than 120 countries around the world, be fluent in several other languages, and be exposed to virtually dozens of languages around the world, and get to meet people from presidents and prime ministers and princes and sultans and everything else, and serve along some of the best people that you would ever encounter anywhere on the face of the earth, who wore the cloth of their nation on their backs, who were so important to us as a nation, as friends and allies. Truly a privilege to serve.
We'd like to thank you for the interview and thank you for your service, Colonel.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, buddy. Good luck.